Hi everyone, it's Sean here, and we've got another Matchday Sessions AMA for you. Our guest this week was Meghann Burke, who is a former goalkeeper and the current executive director of the NWSL Players Association. It was really cool to talk to her and find out more about what her job involves, get her thoughts on women's football at both domestic and international level, and even test out her Bristol slang skills from her time playing in England. Check it out, guys. Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us. We've put out the message on Discord as well, so hopefully some more will join during the course of the call. But I'm joined today by Meghann Burke, who is a former goalkeeper and the current executive director of the NWSL Players Association. So if you have any questions, you can either reply to this tweet with them or you can send them in Discord, and we'll put this to Meghann. So first of all, Meghann, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be with you.
So we mentioned your current role working as the executive director of the NWSL Players Association. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that involves and what your day-to-day is like?
Sure. So as executive director of the Players Association, I run the union that represents all NWSL players. And so, the central function of a labor union is to enforce a collective bargaining agreement and advocate for our players. And so, I kind of wake up every day thinking about players. I spend all day putting players first and thinking about their needs. And it doesn't end necessarily when the workday is over. Players have my cell number and often have questions. Honestly, every day we get questions from our members who, are navigating situations or just want to understand their contract or know what the league rules are. And so really the day-to-day is advocating for NWSL players.
Do you think that it helps that you are a former player yourself, so you understand the kind of difficulties and questions they could encounter?
Yeah, I do. What's really unique about the NWSL Players Association is that this is very much a player-formed, player-run, player-focused organization. It was organized by NWSL players in 2017, although yesterday Tori texted me. She's like, "You're not going to believe this email I just found." And it was an email from 2015. Yeah. When the players were all talking to each other, getting organized, creating committees, thinking about how to create an entity that would advocate for them. And fast forward, every executive director that has served, well, I'm the first full-time executive director, but obviously Brooke Elby, Yael Everbush, former players. I'm a former player, did not play in the NWSL, but played in the WSA, WPS, and a bunch of other leagues. And our staff, I'm proud to say we have 2 additional staff members that we've brought on in the last couple of years. Sydney Miramontes is our business agent. She is a former NWSL player. And Kelsey Davis, who we've just hired. I guess I'm making that announcement here on this Twitter space.
You heard it here first.
She's joined us. That's right. Exactly. You heard it here first. She's our new player affairs manager, full-time as of this week. Kelsey is a goalkeeper, former player from the WPS days. And so I do think it's helpful. I don't know that it's, it'll be interesting as our team grows, if that trend maintains. We want to make sure we put people in the best position to succeed with the relevant skill set. But I do think being former players is an important perspective that we bring.
And you were involved, I believe this is correct, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you're involved in the signing of the first collective bargaining agreement.
Yes, that's right.
How important is that to the future of the league and to the players and everything like that?
I don't think it's overstating things to say that it's monumental and, in fact, might have been what saved this league. Right. There were a number of key moments in the history of NWSL, but I think establishing a framework for players that put their needs, their health and safety first, that elevated professional standards to make teams come along with us into the future. I think, you can attribute the trajectory that NWSL is on now to what the players have done for the past 10 plus years. And then the key moments also being the signing of the collective bargaining agreement and the joint investigation that concluded late last year.
And obviously, like you mentioned there about the old emails you were reading and thinking about how far the league has come, but there's still, there's been great strides made, but there's still a lot of potential progress that could be made. Do you have sort of specific aims and targets in mind, or is it just about continuing to help it grow and become more and more popular?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And honestly, it's probably the most important question we're navigating now. You know, I would say we need to continue to grow the commercial business. It's interesting to say that as a union. Oftentimes in the traditional labor management relationship, you're looking at how to divvy up pieces of the pie. And we are very committed to growing the pie itself. And we've tried to do that through launching our own group licensing program. You know, the collective bargaining agreement, we talk about it every day. It establishes minimum standards, but by no means does it put a ceiling on what's possible and what growth can look like. And so what that means to us is, you know, getting a better broadcast deal in the coming year and making sure that more eyeballs can watch what we do, because we think it's wildly entertaining and we want it to be more accessible to people, and the production quality to be what it should be. We want to see more sponsors come in. We want to see more fans coming to our games. It's a World Cup year, and what an exciting time to get to know players that you might not known about before. And so, yeah, we really think that growing the commercial business is a key piece to then in our next collective bargaining agreement, continuing to push the standard so that we can see a dramatic increase in minimum salaries. We do think that free agency and guaranteed contracts are the global standard under the rules and the status and transfer of players. We want to see that happen. But we also know it's iterations, it's steps. And we feel like this first CBA was a critical step in that direction, but by no means is that the destination.
Right, very, very thorough answer. Thank you.
Be careful what you ask. I tend to get excited.
I'm very grateful. Yeah. One thing that stood out for me when I was sort of looking more into the NWSL is these clubs sort of exist in their own right. Whereas in Europe, like, so I'm based in England, and we have the WSL, and these are the teams that are linked to the men's teams as well. So, you know, like Arsenal, Chelsea, obviously.
That's right.
And I saw recently that Leah Williamson said she was concerned about women's football being used as a stepping stone into the men's game. So, like, you know, you take your children to see the women's team, and then they're like, oh, there's the men's team as well, and they kind of, you know, like move away from that. What do you think are the sort of the benefits, and do you think that there's a future of maybe more of these teams existing in their own right, so that they're not maybe kind of seen as like an add-on to the men's team, and they have, you know, their own fan bases and their own history and this sort of thing?
That's exactly right. Well, you just identified exactly what makes NWSL unique in the pro soccer landscape. We stand on our own 2 feet. And in fact, you know, at the beginning, U.S. Soccer managed the league and funded the national team players to play in the league. That's no longer the case. We literally stand on our own 2 feet, independent of, you know, there are a couple teams that are co-owned between the same ownership group in Orlando, Portland, North Carolina, and Louisville, and Houston, who own USL or MLS teams. But by no means are they like, you know, it's a separate standalone team that has their own staff, their own operations, their own identity. And I think that's really unique. I admire what the Women's Super League has done. It's incredible what is happening elsewhere around the world. But I think it's really powerful for women to say, like, this is the value of our league. Yeah. This is the value of our sponsorship deals, our broadcast deals, you know, our ticket revenue as a separate standalone business. Because, you know, you saw it, for example, I don't know if you follow here in the United States, women's basketball.
Okay.
And historically, the NCAA, there was such little value placed on women generally, and specifically in the area of broadcast or sponsorship, that it was just kind of thrown in there with deals they were doing for the men.
Yeah.
And what they didn't realize, like, this is where people kind of lose their business sense. There's money to be made.
Yeah, yeah.
People want to watch this stuff. And if you saw the women's basketball Final Four last weekend, I mean, it was wild. People watched the final more than they watched most anything else on TV that weekend, because it was wildly entertaining, great to watch, you know, great basketball, storylines, players and characters that you want to follow. And so now the NCAA has realized, wait a second, we should separate out the broadcast rights of the men from the women, because there's money to be made here. And that's, you know, that's a pretty basic idea that is just now, I think, coming into fruition, where people realize, wait a second, there's an appetite here. What players and fans have known that for eons. And I think the market is finally catching up to that fact.
Yeah, no, it's good to see that sort of development is continuing in that way, and there's progress being made there. I just want to talk a little bit now about your own playing days, if that's okay. So you were a
Absolutely.
goalkeeper for, I think, around 20 years. Your playing career was close to that. That's right.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, so I'm 42, and my first kick of a ball was when I was 3,
Wow.
and I still play in an old lady league. Although I fancy myself a striker now. I refuse to play goal in rec
Okay,
league, but
you've earned that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So every goalkeeper actually dreams of scoring a goal, right? Let's be real. But yeah, I played in the WSA, WPS, W League, WPSL, and Women's English Premier League from 2000 to 2010.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is quite a difficult question because it's come on so much in recent years. But what do you think are like the biggest differences between the status of women's football now compared to when you were playing, both on and off the
Yeah.
pitch?
It really, there are similarities, but it is very, very different. I was thinking, of course, about my experience in Bristol in anticipation of this conversation. And, I remember, so I trained in Bristol, I trained with the boys academy goalkeepers.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the first experience I had where I was like, these boys don't care that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a goalkeeper, and that's the defining characteristic and feature. And it was a wonderful experience. And I just remember like telling people, like, something's happening here. Like, the world's changing and this generation's different. And it's going to continue to push the game to evolve, not just because of what we're doing in the women's game, but because of the way the men's and boys are changing. And I remember that feeling. It was very different from my experience when I would, play at the Mem or anywhere else in Bristol. But I just was really impressed by these young men who loved football, loved playing with good players, loved people who train hard and wanted to push each other. And that was a moment where I could feel the game changing around me a little bit, which is an interesting, as you get older, it's like almost kind of creepy when the game changes around you. You're like,
Yeah.
I thought I knew this thing. What's happening? And I've coached quite a bit over the years, and you've seen what's changed. I think is, first of all, I think an expectation of professionalism and the way players are treated. Like, we don't have to have the mentality now where we're just going to take what we get and be grateful for it. Like, we can advocate for ourselves and push for a better standard because we deserve that. Another piece of it that's very, very different, I think, and by the way, what I mean by that is, for example, I think of the quality of the surfaces that I played on were, I can't cuss on Twitter Space, I guess. They were awful.
Thank you for
it was
censoring.
Really, yeah, I was like, wait a second. There's always at least 3 for me every conversation, so I got 2 more to go. And that impacts your performance, and impacts your confidence, and impacts so much about your playing experience just as an athlete. And I look at, I was fortunate to play in a quality surface in college, and the jump down from college to pro was really depressing, to be like, these environments are not suitable for the level we're playing at. I think now players expect something much better, much different. And the other piece of it that's really different, I think, 2. One is nutrition. I think we have a much better understanding for how to fuel and recover to maximize performance. I would have loved to have those tools when I was playing. And then just data, like the whole data field is wild and interesting. Just understanding your heart rate and exertion and how to manage workload. We didn't have that. We're just like, get on the line and run until you puke. And then, okay, you didn't puke yet, keep going. I think we're a little more sophisticated in those areas. I think it would have been a lot of fun to have those tools when I was playing.
Yeah, I feel like stats have just like kind of taken over football at every level now. I feel like there's a stat for everything. You're like, she coughed 3 times in the first half. Right.
That's right. Well, and it's an interesting point about where that takes us to, because I was having a conversation with some players yesterday about this, and we're like, there is a thing as too much data.
Yeah.
There can be an unhealthy relationship to your data too, and it also can like minimize some of the equally important pieces of like creativity and fortitude and some of the squishier, harder to measure components of being an athlete. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, you touched on it a little bit in your answer before, but I guess do you wish that there are there's a little bit of you that wishes you could have played in the landscape where it was more similar today, with the bigger crowds, the increased coverage, the stats, the nutrition, that kind of thing?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I mean, I'm one of
The
those
daft
players
question.
who, no, I mean, I'll never forget the night after my last professional game was in September 2010
Hmm.
for New Jersey Sky Blue. And I couldn't sleep that night. I was so amped
Mm.
after a game that I wouldn't be able to sleep. And I remember all night long just thinking, like, I could do this forever. Like,
Yeah.
I love it. And then realizing, wait, I can't do it forever. And a friend of mine had once said, you never retire. Like, if you really love it, you never really retire. It just kind of evolves into the next thing. And so that's
Yeah.
how I like to think of it. My relationship with soccer has evolved into a different stage, but would I have loved to play now? You better believe it. I still think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I've touched on any.
You can tell I'm
Yeah.
reliving it, right? Like, oh, the longing in my voice.
Oh, just staring longingly out of a window now.
How did you know? That's exactly what I'm doing.
So you obviously had a very long career, and you would have played with and against a lot of different players. But is there a single player who stands out as the best you played alongside and against?
Oh my gosh, what a question.
Good luck.
I was actually, oh God, that is a really, really, really hard question to answer, and any answer is going to get me in trouble. But I will say, when I was drafted out of college and got to North Carolina, and you look around and you're like, oh my God, that's Birgit Prinz, who
Yeah.
is just like a beast, in the box. And holy cow, that's Carla Overbeck, then captain of the U.S. women's national team. So, I mean, for them, they're pretty high up there, and just the experience of getting to see what they do day in, day out. But then I'd have to say, my last season, I got to play in Chicago alongside Formiga, who I just feel like
Okay.
is, immortal. Like,
Yeah.
like how old is she really? Like she's so good. What is it? Seven
Yeah.
World Cups she played in. So, 7 World Cups, that's just legend
That's crazy.
status,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have to give respect to that. So I'd put her up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, did you ask who did I play
Yes.
against? I will have to say there were oh, see, this is my second nearly cussing moment, and I'm censoring myself. There were two bleep moments in my career. Like, as a goalkeeper, could stand it. I felt like I could go toe to toe with anybody, but there were two moments where I was like, oh, like gulp.
Yeah.
One was my debut in WSA, which candidly did not go the way I would have loved for it to. But I came out for a cross thinking I had it, and crosses were like my thing, and
Yeah.
I'm looking at the ball, and then next thing I know, I'm looking up at the sky on my back. And I was like, literally, what just happened?
Okay. Yeah.
I ran I met Abby Wambach. That's what happened. I was
Yeah.
like,
Oh
oh,
wow.
wow.
Yeah.
And then I would say the other one was in 2010. We were playing against, it was Sky Blue playing against the Seoul and Marta. I mean,
Oh
anytime
wow.
Marta
Yeah.
puts her head down, she has a superhuman gear
Yeah.
that it defies physics. And she was literally, she was beating, she put her head down, and I was like, oh God. And she just shot out of a cannon on my left
Yeah.
flank, and cut in, and it makes it all the more rewarding if you're able to snuff a few saves out of a
Yes.
situation like that. But those two are I think next level.
No, those are strong answers. You pulled some very big names out of the bag there. I've got to say as well, the way you stopped yourself from cussing at the last minute, you can tell you were a goalkeeper. Those were some brilliant saves there.
Thank you.
It must be up there. Yeah, sorry for the
Again, still got
for
one
the
more to
very
go.
laboured pun there. But now you mentioned it briefly before. You played with Bristol Rovers. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Yeah, yeah.
right.
I wanted to talk about this because I grew up very close to Bristol.
Oh, where'd you
And
grow up?
do you know? I don't suppose you know a place called Chippenham by any chance?
I remember hearing of it. I can't say that I
Oh
know it.
wow!
Yeah.
I can't believe how many people. Every time I tell people I grew up, no one's heard of it. They're always like, "Yeah, yeah, I know that place." I'm like, "Oh, well, I've heard of that place." I'm like, "Oh, maybe it was just me belittling where I grew up." But yeah, we'll move away from that.
I love that.
So, what are your memories of playing in England and the surroundings and Bristol in particular? Because it's quite different, especially weather-wise, from where you
Yeah,
would have been used to playing, I guess.
very different. I joked that it rained upside down in England. And it
Sounds
was,
about right.
yeah, like the sun would go down by like 3 or 4 o'clock, in the winter. I had a lovely experience. I loved Bristol. I loved the people of Bristol. I think my sense of humor is probably more aligned with the British sense of humor, like really dry. I really it was such a wonderful experience. And, it also complicated its own way, but I just was struck by like, obviously we speak the same language. We all speak English, but I remember when I first got there being like, getting a bus ticket. I was like, it wasn't a round trip, it was a return. And I was like, well, I want to return. It's just these moments of awkwardness when you think you're going to know what's going on. And you're like, I actually don't. And I just was struck by the history, the culture. I love the music scene. The bridge. Oh my gosh, why can't I remember the name of the bridge? The suspension bridge, the big
Clifton
one.
Suspension
Thank
Bridge.
you, the Clifton suspension. Yeah, we walked out. I mean, like, it just and look, I was basically a broke soccer player, living it up and just kind of putting things together. But Bristol was a really, really cool place to play and live, and also just at that time in 2004 and 5. Being in a culture that loves football as much as England does. And, the U.S. has come a long way in the nearly 20 years since. But just being in a football-loving culture, it speaks to me. I loved it.
When you mentioned there about a bit of difficulties with being understood, I thought you were going to mention the Bristol accent, which can be quite strong.
I was thinking to myself, like, what was the Bristol accent? It was like the O's and the E's. And then, like,
it was.
What I spent like 30 seconds with the Irish national team, and I could actually do a really good Irish accent, but I'm not sure. The Bristol accent is like hilarious. It feels like it's many things at once.
It's ridiculous. It is because Bristol's quite a built-up city, but then the people who the accent in Bristol is very Lord of the Rings, I would say.
What's that about? Why?
It's crazy. It's very farm-based. My next question was going to be to you: can you do a Bristol accent? But I don't.
Well, it's funny. The only saying I remember, "All right, me lover," and I have no idea. If I got it right, but that's my memory.
That was strong. That was strong. So, I mean, I grew up around these, so I feel like I've earned the right to do. But the number of times I were like, "All right, me lover." It was just
that's so good. Yes.
It was, and I've got a lifetime education of that, and even I came from I wasn't born there, but I came from not far away, and I had trouble understanding even, and I was
right.
So if someone coming from another country, big respect to you for.
Well, I appreciate that. I thought everyone liked me. I was like, oh no, they just refer to everyone as lovers. So yeah, I guess it's
it's a very
it's sweet,
romantic way of putting it. Yeah. So you've also touched on the next part, which is the Bristol slang quiz, which I was going to ask you. A lot of the things I googled were not suitable for broadcast, which
that sounds about right.
Yeah,
that'll be the after dark version of
yeah. So the first one, you mentioned it there, but if you just like to, because I'm sure our listeners are extremely confused by now, but when someone says to you, "All right, me lover," what are they getting at there?
I think it just means hi.
Yeah,
like, how are you doing?
Yeah. Yes.
And I remember the first couple times, like, Gary Green was our coach, and he had a really thick accent, and I'd be like, I'd have to be like, am I supposed to answer that? Or
he okay? Is he ill?
I don't know. I can't tell. And then everyone did it. I was like, oh, I think it's just like it's like in here. I think when we say just like, how you doing? Like, you're not actually likely to get a response. You're just like, hey, nice to see you. Anyway, it's a greeting, I guess.
It is a great. Yes, that's a very, very good way of putting it. It's and like as you explained, it does not necessarily mean that people are lovers. So if anyone's ever in Bristol, don't worry. I mean, worry a bit, but don't worry about that.
Maybe a little bit, but yeah.
All right, the next one I've got here is like, oh, that's Gert Lush.
I was just imagining my teammates with how, like, hearing that, I'm like imagining the people who said lush all the, like, it took me I actually know this one because for the longest, I used to think of lush as like grass is lush, as in thick, and I remember like that ice cream's lush, and I'd be like, what? I know it's runny. I don't, and then but I then came to learn it's like, no, it just means like really, really good. I think, right?
Spot
it's like,
on, yes.
Okay. I nailed it.
There's I don't have it in America. The soap shop called Lush, and that causes a lot of confusion over here, because it's both senses. It's
It
it's
is.
nice in every sense, and it's you're doing very well here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're doing a lot better than I would have the first time round. This is one I've never actually heard anyone say, but I quite like the words. It's like, "Oh, I'm all betwaddled."
It's funny. I was like, as you said it, I'm like, I don't think I ever heard it, but I think I did and didn't know what it meant because it sounds familiar. And
Yeah,
then I was like, is it like all mixed up or something? Like,
it is exactly that.
oh my God, nailed it.
You are an absolute
Officially a
scholar of the
linguist. Yes,
Bristol. Yeah,
expert.
you are an expert here. I'm starting to think that you're putting on this American accent and you're just in Bristol somewhere.
I do.
Is.
I got to tell you, I have 3 kids, 8 years
Mm.
old and twin 4-year-olds. And my wife and I talk all the time about how fun it would be to bring them back. I think they would,
Oh
it
wow.
would be, they would get a kick out of it.
I'm having like a sort of similar. So I grew up near Bristol, but I lost the accent, as you might tell.
I can
But
tell.
I don't know
Not at
what
all.
my accent is. It's just a mishmash. But my son is. I live in Manchester now, so I
Oh,
think that my
nice.
son is going to grow up with a Mancunian accent. Be like, Dad, what are you saying? I can't understand you. And so that's something I feel you're. I appreciate
Yes.
your saying that it'd be fun. For me, I'd just be
Yes.
terrified because I don't think I have the roughness of Manchester in my accent.
That's cute. I love it.
No, thank you very much for doing it. They're a very good sport to do that. Appreciate
Oh,
that.
this is fun.
So now we're gonna, I think, move on a bit more to players and teams.
Okay.
The NWSL season has recently got back underway. Who do you think are the teams to watch out for this season? I know you don't want to get you in trouble, but
Thank you for that. I was
yeah,
like, yeah, I'm like, God, anytime I talk about teams or players, I run the risk of getting in
yeah.
deep
Well,
trouble.
you can.
So
I bullied you into it, and you can name every team if you want.
I mean, they're right. I hope everyone will watch every team. And honestly, when people ask me, like, I love when like my good friends are like confessing that they've never really watched soccer, or they don't really know who to follow, which I think is okay. Like, let me first address, if you are a new fan to NWSL or you haven't yet watched, like, every team has an identity and a story to tell, and that's the part that I think is fun about sports, is figuring out like which team you vibe with, and so I think you could make the case for all 12. And that's, I will say that, like, what makes the NWSL, I think, one of the, in addition to standing on our own 2 feet and, not being kind of part of a men's league, is that our table is so tight, top to bottom.
Yes.
Like, anyone can win on any given day. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, I remember during CBA negotiations, so it would have been summer of 2021, there was a point where 6 points separated 1 from 10.
Wow.
That's how tight it was. So,
Yeah.
You can pick any team and have a lot of fun the whole season long. That being said, I will say I'm definitely, I have a soft spot for underdogs.
Okay.
And so I would love to see Louisville and Orlando, really, like, there's a lot to love about those 2 clubs. And I live in North Carolina, so I have a soft spot for the South too. And Louisville, look, they're doing a lot of cool stuff with their stadium and in the community, and they've got some great players. They've had some new signings, and you just like would love to see them continue to grow and flourish in a smaller to mid-sized market. Same with, Orlando is like historically hard to understand why they haven't, like, I feel like they've underperformed relative to their roster. And so you're really kind of rooting for them to, I think, have a good run at least. And, that, and then I have to say, like, I have to acknowledge, I know everyone loves to hate the Yankees or the Cowboys. And I feel like you could easily hate the Thorns are far and away. They've won more championships than anyone, but they're so good. I mean, the start of the season, you're just like, and I got to say, in addition, like, they've been through a lot. I also have a soft spot for the teams that through the last couple of years have just been through so much. And, I think Portland is a good example of a team that has really come together in the face of a lot of adversity. And so I actually think, even though they're perennial favorites, they're also kind of an underdog in a way too. Yeah. So, they're just playing so well. Sophia Smith, just every time she touches the ball, you feel like something's going to happen. Defensively, they're solid. I love watching Bella Bixby play. And I also love, by the way, their ridiculous jerseys, the white kit that came out with the tattoo. I thought it was hilarious. I love the players were just like, yeah, this is we got a tattoo on our jersey. What? I love the response. I thought it was great. Yeah. Like, you love to hate it, you know? It's like, those are the, and that's what I mean. The stories. Gotham is another one that, like, they just have such a cool vibe. You know, they've got a real, like, what Yael as general manager, former founder of the Players Association, is doing is, I think, really, really special. And so, yeah, I mean, look, I could make the case for every single team, and I think those are some fun ones. Just keep an eye out for and see what they do this year.
I think that's one thing that American sports obviously does a lot of things really well, but one thing that I really, you know, watching from an English perspective is the way American teams create like a culture and identity, like this is us, this is what we're about. Yep. I think it's amazing. It goes beyond the sport in a way that, like, I don't think we've really caught up with yet in Europe, but it's just it's really cool to look, especially on social media, which I'm looking at a lot. So,
oh, they do that. Well, I mean, look, you guys have, you know, not just decades, but like centuries of history. So, you know, that's part of it, is like, you know, you have to create the stories when they haven't been passed. Yeah. I'm a lifelong St. Louis Cardinals fan. Like, I've, you know, heard stories from my grandparents about their parents and great-grandparents going to, you know, my great-grandparents going to games. And, like, that's a neat way to connect people across, you know, around a team. Like in Bristol, right? It was either City or Rovers, but not both.
Yes.
And, you know, you were excommunicated if you departed from whatever the chosen team was of the family. Like, we don't necessarily have that yet, at least in NWSL or in a lot of American soccer culture. And so what I think we've seen instead in the last 10 or 15 years is a real connection to community and identity, where we're lacking history. I think we do have that community identity, and it's really, really neat to see. I think each team's carving out their space.
I've been reminded by my colleagues to highlight Washington Spirit, because they wear the Matchday logo on their shirts. So,
you know, and that's the president of the Players Association, of course, is Tori Huster with the Washington Spirit, and I managed to leave the Spirit out of the conversation, and I will hear about it after this. So thank you.
Don't worry, I've already pulled you up on it. It's fine. My colleagues have pulled me up on it, so we've been reprimanded. So
that's okay. Good. I love it.
So on a similar theme, who are the players? I mean, I guess maybe like 3 or 5, or even more or less, up to you. Who are the NWSL players you're most excited to see this season? Who you think will have a big season?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to the goalkeeper union.
Nice.
All the goalkeepers. I got to give the goalkeepers love. I'm just saying the standard of goalkeeper, and I mean this sincerely. I mean, I joke about, you know, goalkeepers because I am one, but you know, the standard of goalkeeping in this league is bar none. It's off the chart. It is off the charts good. I would put our standard of goalkeeping up against any league anywhere in the world, men's or women's. I mean, you know, Alyssa Nair, Jane Campbell, Barney, Bella Bixby, Aubrey Kingsbury, Caitlin Rowland, Katie Loon, Michelle Bates, Fallon to this Joyce. I mean, you can't pick one. I think the goalkeepers put on a great show. So that's easily like 36 players. I'd have about 300 more to go.
Well. I'm impressed.
To do my job well. I gotta say though, the rookie who kind of stole our hearts at the NWSL draft, just with her like swagger and like confidence and just brimming smile, and like then she gets out there and scores in her debut is Messiah Bright at Orlando. Just like I think she's gonna be fun to watch. You know, it's fun to kind of like be surprised. You know, I will say I tend to have a little bit of maybe a bias for the veterans. You know, they just have been through so much, and I always want to give a shout to the veterans. So I can be a little like when Trinity Rodman came into the league, I was like, we'll see how you do. Okay. You know, and then her first touch was a goal. And I was like, there you go. Oh, okay. I guess. Shut up. That was amazing. So, you know, with that said, I think the Dabinia and Lola Bonta connection in Kansas City, now that, you know, Dabinia is one of the players who was a contested free agent when we went to arbitration last year. And I think I really do believe that, you know, winning free agency rights for her and other veterans at arbitration meant not only that they would stay in NWSL, but they would be given this kind of newfound freedom to latch on with a team where they could really explore what they're capable of. And so I just think Dabinia is like, she's world class. And seeing her alongside Lola Bonta is just so much fun to watch. Like, you know, that's going to be a super fun duo. That's a change from years past. And then, you know, I also just want to give a shout out. I think Sinead Farrelly has already had a historic, amazing season just by showing up. Seeing
Yeah.
her sign with Gotham and then debut for Gotham and then debut for Ireland in the same week. She's already, I mean, yeah, I think she could call it a season already. And it's just been such a joy to see her play with joy.
Nice one. Well, thank you very much. That was very, again, amazing answer. This is great. One question, we discussed actually at Matchday is, so recently we had the finalissima between England and Brazil for the winners of the European Championship and the Copa America. And what would you think about maybe having sort of something similar between the NWSL champions and the winners of the UEFA Women's Champions League in terms of, do you think that's something? I'm not trying to tell you, let's set this up, but that would be a pretty amazing spectacle.
Oh my God. Right? Are you kidding me? Well, I would add to it La Liga MX Femenina. Some of what's happening around the world, like, it has to happen. I wouldn't say it just would be cool. It has to happen. I feel like we're now seeing the likes of FIFA and others recognize, like, hey, we got to do more to really, like, there's an opportunity to grow this game commercially, not just competitively. And there's a hunger for that. So I'm here for it.
Because you have like I think they're discussing about having the first Women's Club World Cup, which in the men's game, I think maybe the European clubs aren't really as, focused on that, because, it's like, oh, well, if it's happening outside Europe, it's not, there's that attitude not happening. Whereas in the women's game, obviously, the support and the quality of the standard of play in America is probably, the biggest in the world. So it gives it that added edge to, it's not just like, kind of an additional tournament. This is like this could be like a serious thing to decide, who is ultimately the best in the world.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think this is the key to unlocking what's possible in women's professional football. And let me say this too, because we're having a lot of very real conversations about the NWSL schedule and the FIFA calendar, and how do we get harmony between these things? It's not an easy solution. And it's forcing a lot of existential questions. And one of the things that I feel very confident saying, when you look at the FIFA international windows and the FIFA calendar, it's written by FIFA, which is very Eurocentric, and that's because it's very male-centric. The reality is, and I say this with deep respect, reverence, admiration for what federations around the world are doing in women's football and how much the U.S. is no longer the presumptive favorite, but the historic and kind of ongoing commercial power center of women's football is in the United States. And so, you can't bring what I would call kind of patriarchal view of football that's, Eurocentric to the same analysis with women's football. It's here in North America. And it would be, I think, commercially, competitively very interesting to see how it all stacks up. There are different styles of play, different schools of thought, and how fun would it be? I mean, the calendar does make it difficult, because we have seen where, the likes of Olympique Lyonnais or PSG or AC Milan or FC Frankfurt, they'll come over here to play in tournaments, but it's our mid-season and it's their preseason. And it just doesn't feel like, it's not fair. It's just not, it doesn't make sense, So we have to solve the calendar issues on our end, NWSL and FIFA together, to make it possible for there to be something along the lines of what you're describing, because I think everyone agrees how cool that would be.
It would, yeah. Fingers crossed for that. Speaking of very big worldwide tournaments, it is a World Cup year.
It is.
and there you go.
That's my answer.
Who are you expecting to be contending to win the trophy this year? I mean, obviously, how are things looking for the USA? Things are looking, I imagine, pretty. I'm very sorry if you can hear an ice cream van going past my house.
Oh, as long as you get me one. Come on. That's like the second or third reference to ice cream in this call. I want something.
I know. It's even weirder because it's raining. Why are you going? So this is linking back to Bristol, but yeah, sorry. I'm wandering away from the topic there.
World Cup, yeah.
World Cup challenges and the USA in particular. How are they looking?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the US looks so good. We're just look, it's top to bottom, and there's so many great storylines. I mean, of course, I want to give a shout out to Mal Swanson. she was just on a streak, and I think all of us felt like, the wind just sucked out of your sails when she went down. So, a lot of love for her. But that squad is just, top to bottom, like just world class. There isn't a player on there who couldn't start for a lot of teams around the world. And so I think the U.S. is, of course, the favorite, going for 3 in a row, and that would be pretty historic. But I have to say, like, I got to go to the 2015 and 2019 World Cups, and I am planning on going this summer. My family is amazing, and my wife, I married up. I'm like, are you sure you want to take care of these wild, crazy turkeys for that long by yourself? The kids got me a Christmas gift that I get to go to New Zealand, Australia.
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah. And I got to tell you, like, if you've ever been to a World Cup, people focus a lot on the knockout stages, but the group play is where it's at.
Oh God.
Like,
yeah.
it's so fun, and you get to see, like, it's just that is to me, that's the World Cup
isn't
experience.
It? It's just go every day. There's a huge game.
Yeah. So, I will say, from like both those experiences, I will get to the tournament and be like, holy cow, Thailand or Costa Rica, or, like, there's these teams that are so fun to watch. And so I'm looking forward to being surprised, I guess, when I get there and get to watch games. But, I do love watching Spain and Brazil, the way they play. And look, Marta is, I got to get I'll give a lot of love to our player representative, Alex Morgan, as being, among the greats. But Marta is just ridiculous. She's coming back. I think I will predict right now that Marta's going to come back even stronger, which is scary.
Wow. Yeah.
Post injury.
Very daunting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you got, Caroline and Debinha. So I think Brazil is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And then, of course, it's really cool to see England, France, Germany continuing to play at that level. I miss the days. I know Hege Riisa's coach in Norway now. It's like, it'll be fun to watch some of the countries that, like, Japan, where, like, you really root for them to come back to the kind of level of dominance that they once had. So I just shouted out a few teams there, I guess, but all of them, of course. But,
yes, of course. No, you're very diplomatic. I really respect that. It will be wonderful for everyone taking part.
Well, I guess it's also job security, but yes.
Yeah. See, there you go, thinking about security at the back, goalkeeping mindset.
See, there you go.
We've had a question from Jeff, one of our listeners, who is also one of our Matchday employees.
Awesome. Hi, Jeff.
He's asking about what your thoughts are on the status of other female football players associations around the world. So are there any peers that you admire? And is there anything that the NWSL Players Association is doing or planning to do to support football outside of the world in terms of sharing their model of success with their players and clubs?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. And I love that the premise of the question is that we've had success. That's always fun to be like, we've come a long way. We've done a lot of good work. Well, let me start by saying, Sarah Gregorius at FIFPro is one of my favorite people on the planet. She's wicked smart, former player for New Zealand, who has just been so generous with her time and brains, frankly, during CBA negotiations. I actually, before the PA was formally recognized and before I took this job, had been at FIFPro's headquarters in Amsterdam back in 2018 for the initial brainstorming phase of how they were going to tackle women's football globally. And then, I guess a year after that, when we had the summit or symposium, I attended that. And so we are, through FIFPro, connected to others around the world. And, I think that's a really important relationship. What's interesting about the United States and our union structurally is that it's different than every other country around the world, as I've learned through FIFPro. Here in the United States, each league, each national team has its own independent union. So you've got NWSL PA for NWSL, you've got MLS PA for MLS, USL PA for USL. You have the U.S. men's national team PA separate and apart from the U.S. women's national team PA.
Wow.
Elsewhere around the world, you have one PFA.
Yes.
That's it. Whether it's domestic, international, men's or women's. I think there are pros and cons to all of it, right? Of course. I think historically the disadvantage is that, along with, commercial interests in women's football, there was a lack of interest, investment, and advocacy for women in a single PFA. And that's where I think standing on our own 2 feet again is really important, because I only answer to the NWSL players. I don't answer to anyone else. They're my bosses. I advocate. I only think about them. We work very, very closely alongside MLSPA, USLPA, US Women's National Team PA, of course, because we represent the same players. But I think that's interesting. I would love, that's something that we're continuing to kind of brainstorm about with FIF Pro, is what that means, what it looks like. I have had really wonderful relationships and conversations with the Australian PFA, the English PFA. I met with the French PFA. It was a while back now, where they're asking us questions about our CBA and group licensing, for example, because elsewhere around the world with group licensing, federations control those rights. And I think it speaks to the strength of players and our advocacy here in the United States that we own our own rights. And that's something, FIF Pro has packaged those group rights for a lot of the unions when it comes to certain areas. But there's a lot of information sharing that can be had that I think will really elevate the game globally, the more we're all talking to each other. And even if we're structurally different, there are a lot of common themes. So, yeah, we stand here ready to support and stand with all the PFAs around the world that are advocating for women's football.
Nice. It's really good to hear. Really exciting to see what goes forward with that. And now the final question, because I don't want to take too much of your time, if I haven't already. But
that was great.
So we have at Matchday, it's all about the main focus is like at the moment the player cards. So we have like a bunch of licensed player cards through FIF Pro, and players can collect and build their squads and go up against other teams. We currently only have men's cards, but we're very excited in the near future to be launching our women's card series as well. And we have different rarities. So you have common is the most common, obviously. Mm-hmm. Then you have limited, rare, and legendary going up in kind of rank there. And I just want to ask you, what would be your top 3 women players of any time period? It's essentially, what's your top 3? Who would you pick for limited, rare, and legendary across any time period?
I love that.
If you thought you had difficult questions before, there's one for you.
I as I'm sitting here, I'm like, there is no answer that doesn't get me in trouble except one. There is, conveniently enough, there have been 3 presidents in the history of the NWSL Players Association. I would have to give a shout to Brooke Elby, the first. She was my predecessor. We worked together. I would have her as a limited. I would have Tori Huster, our current president, and has played every single season of the NWSL, if you can believe that. Led us through CBA negotiations and so much more. She would have to be rare. And then I got to give a shout to the founding player of the NWSL Players Association, Yael Averbush, as a legend. There are a lot of folks that would be up there. But she also, if you ever saw her play, was a hell of a player. All 3 of them are. So there. How about
that? I mean, you did that expertly. I felt like I was watching art there. That was so majestically done. The only one I would add in is yourself, Meghann, because this has been absolutely legendary for me.
Well, thank you for that. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate you having me on.